Hey folks, if you enjoy the show and you want to help us make more videos, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Okay, thanks, bye, love you.
Right, so I came into this franchise quite late. I mean, Busta Rhymes late. So as you'd expect, that had a very impressionable impact on me. But looking back on the original film, considering that it's approaching 40 years old, it holds up extremely well. So let's talk about it.
You could call Halloween a horror juggernaut, as it were. In all of John Carpenter's filmography, I think this is his most impactful and influential contribution to cinema. In the same way Psycho invented the slasher genre, Halloween standardized it by establishing tropes and iconography commonplace in the genre. But even in today's oversaturated market of repeating nonsense, very few of them even come marginally close to capturing the mystique that is Michael Myers himself. The frequent debate surrounding the first film is whether or not Michael is simply an escaped lunatic or some unrelenting force of evil. The absolute ambiguity that surrounds him is pivotal to a lot of the film's foreboding tension. You have no clue how he thinks, how he feels, or how exactly he's able to seemingly appear and disappear in a moment's notice. At one point, the film even questions his ability to drive despite being in a mental institution since the age of 6, and all this does is add further layers to Michael's mystery and make me feel bad about my own driving abilities. While he appears as just a man wearing a boiler suit in a $2 William Shatner mask holding a kitchen knife, that was very satisfying to say, the film continually makes you question this by having Michael's doctor Sam Loomis describe him as simply the embodiment of pure evil conveyed by his complete absence of any real human mannerisms.
I watched him for 15 years, sitting in a room, staring at a wall, not seeing the wall, looking past the wall, looking at this night, inhumanly patient, waiting for some secret, silent alarm to trigger him off.
For the record, the sequels do try to explain Michael as part of the Curse of the Thorn, which, in my butchered understanding, is basically if a member kills their entire family, they'll be granted great strength and immortality, which in turn explains why Michael never seems to die and also correlates with his overall motive, which sounds interesting on paper, but why do we need to know this? Because the subtlety of not knowing works irrefutably in its favor.
In fact, the film simply credits him as the Shape, which couldn't make the ambiguity any more glaringly obvious. Carpenter and Deborah Hill were very thorough in their vision for Michael. For one, his costume is designed to completely extract any resemblance or appearance of a personality, thus giving him this otherworldly presence. He's both human and not, kinda like some evil entity wearing another man's skin.
This is about the thrill of wearing another man's skin, feeling his innermost wants and desires, and being in control of his every single move. That's how you get off.
What sells this is how Loomis is genuinely terrified of Michael. He speaks about him rather cryptically, such as commonly referring to him as it or evil, like his first description.
Don't underestimate it,
Don't you think we could refer to it as him?
if you say so.
Loomis is rightfully the only character to understand Michael, but in the sense that he doesn't identify with him as human, but as something else entirely detached from reality, both figuratively and literally. Even when we see Michael's face, it never humanizes him because he looks like a frail-looking zombie, and subsequently, he really is just a sinister shape that blends in with the world despite his costumed appearance. This is something I really hate about Rob Zombie's remake. Even with its despicable, nasty characters and Zombie's trademark cynical delivery, what hurts the film is how much it tries to apply a psychology that simply isn't there. Michael works because less is more, and like with Leatherface, who also got the unnecessary contrived backstory treatment in tacky prequels, when you can only perceive them as they're bluntly portrayed, it lets your imagination wander more vividly. In fact, Nick Castle, who played Michael, was only told to walk from A to B and given virtually no direction in order to make him as soulless as physically possible. Loomis's job is to get through to Michael, but when chatting with the local sheriff, he explains that it was like talking into the abyss, which, for a psychiatrist who isn't supposed to get emotionally attached to their patients, has left him completely frozen with fear ever since. And again, it lets your mind wander as to what he's experienced. His fear, translated through Donald Pleasance's nuanced performance, leaves an alluring implication that he's witnessed something completely unworldly. There is no conscience, no reason, no understanding. he's basically just seen death through Michael's eyes. And this implication is manifested in the opening. The first image we see is a pumpkin as the camera slowly creeps into its eyes, establishing a motif that's carried throughout the rest of the film. Omitting the obvious Psycho references, using the killer's POV forces us to engage with the drama. We have no choice but to watch helplessly from a perspective that we feel completely disassociated with because, well, as Loomis puts it, he's practically dead behind the eyes. It's a strangely subversive take on building suspense because we don't understand the distance between the killer and victim, but because we know where the killer is and can sense him getting closer to the victim, we start to fear for their vulnerability. You want to shout to the victim like a pantomime because you know the inevitable is coming. It's like Hitchcock's use of the bomb under the table. We know it's there, but the character doesn't, hence psychologically, suspense. But what really jarred me about the introduction's ending is seeing that it was a kid the entire time, because it completely changed my emotional understanding of the murder, as I'm naturally swayed to assume it was a grown adult to begin with, while a child lacks motive or awareness for this kind of action, so it lingers in the back of your mind for the rest of the film. And his stance matches Loomis's description later on. He looks like he's under a spell and being controlled because he's totally numb to his actions, hence it really hits home the idea that the only thing behind the eyes of this innocent-looking child is pure evil. Naturally, Carpenter and Hill chose Halloween specifically due to its obvious association with evil. The film is inspired by Samhain, which is a Gaelic tradition that marks the end of the harvest and the beginning of the darker half of the year. The basic premise is that evil can't be killed, and rituals like bonfires are designed to ward off evil spirits, and the main aspect of Halloween the film is that the story takes place entirely on Halloween night, including the sequel, which in its own right is a pretty definitive ending as we see Michael's corpse burning to symbolize the spirit of the holiday coming full circle as his time of evil has ended, at least for now.
Side note, the second film works really well as a two-parter despite director Rick Rosenthal's conflict with Carpenter's intent to make a much more graphically violent film, while Rosenthal sought to have something that was tonally identical to the first film, which is fine, even though it kind of comes at the expense of subtlety.
Effectively, Michael is the personification of the evil proposed by certain traditions, and the film really makes you question why he just stands and watches people constantly, considering it makes up most of the movie's runtime. I mean, it really does. Sometimes it feels purely voyeuristic, like he's just some sick freak stalker or a representation of stranger danger, but then there are times where his seemingly abnormal ability to quickly get out of sight calls into question if we're seeing something real or a Grim Reaper-like entity. I mean, it's easy to assume that he just jumps behind cover when they look away, but Carpenter makes a point to show Laurie actually keep her eyes on him while the camera cuts back and forth, misdirecting our grounded and supernatural perspective of what's going on. We don't necessarily see what she sees. Everything looks very believable, but sometimes it feels a little too unordinary. And once we see Michael get stabbed and shot without any verbal reaction, to see him completely disappear confirms Loomis's suspicions that he's more than man. The way the film concludes with static shots of the house with Michael's heavy breathing and his soundtrack indicate that he truly could be anywhere, thus maintaining absolute unflinching ambiguity surrounding Michael's existence in the world.
So Dean Cundey did the cinematography on this film. He also did films like Jurassic Park, The Thing, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and Psycho 2, would you believe it or not, which is interesting given that this film is completely indebted to Psycho in terms of, well, everything.
Halloween employs the significant use of long tracking and panning shots to maintain this stalker presence throughout. This is probably the most provocative shot for me, not because anything actually happens, but because the large deep focus depth of field that puts the background into plain sight makes me scan around looking for Michael as Laurie continues her innocuous day. Your attention is never drawn specifically to the characters. In this scene, which directly follows Michael's escape, always manages to keep every window, tree, and vehicle clear and on display, creating a lot of natural paranoia. The scene ends with Michael's shoulder coming into view, with his heavy breathing visually communicating his sinister obsession with Laurie. The shot is also 25 seconds long, with 20 of them having Michael static in frame just to reinforce his eerie, persistent presence. This shot that follows soon after just accentuates your growing concern for Laurie's safety. Coupled with how the mask just seemingly floats neatly on his face, just the manner in which he stands projects a real sense of contained anger about him, as he can just see right through the window and directly into her eyes, which is, again, something that Loomis actually makes a point of later in the film. Some scenes barely call attention to Michael, like how he just casually passes by Loomis here, oh shit, you didn't see me, showing how he just organically fits in with the world. It's moments like this where the sheriff's description of a peaceful, quiet, family-friendly town starts to highlight the social fear of the setting. Since it's an affluent, middle-class suburban neighborhood, the worst fear they have is a sinister individual being able to hide amongst the town in broad daylight, thus making him seem even more unstoppable. I mean, I just sugarcoated that. You can put in whatever kind of sinister individual you want.
Could have something to do with that.
What? That's gonna be a problem for me.
Alright, jump cuts have a very bad relationship with audiences. Understandably, they are very cheap. And a lot of people would describe them as being like popping a balloon instead of letting it naturally deflate just so that you can build it right back up again. Let me explain.
There are so many opportunities for Michael to attack in this scene, but the film likes to prolong it by using composition that deceives your anticipation to escalate the suspense, so that once Annie is in the car, the jump scare works because the moment was perfectly conditioned. And while a lot of movies would just randomly throw this at you and waste the opportunity, pop the balloon if you will, Halloween deflates the scare by reducing the music and relying on the sound of her struggles and Michael's breathing to make the moment feel real, while the knife, accentuated by the music cue, signals Michael's success. So what we get is a satisfying build and payoff. It doesn't stop at the peak, but brings us right back down, only to build it back up again in this scene with less anticipation to catch us completely unaware, along with the victim.
Halloween understands subtlety, and I'm a big believer in its effect because it makes films feel a lot more complex as a result. So I think calling it meticulous is probably a more fitting definition because the film is in the exact same headspace as Michael. On the outside it looks primal and hollow, but on the inside there's clearly something very efficient, clever, and deeply disturbing going on. In fact, next week's horror retrospect we're going to be looking at a film that I don't necessarily like, but I think it brings the idea of the killer intruding upon the peaceful setting much closer to home. And also quite literally. Hi folks, thanks for watching. I don't really want to say this, but I've been hit with the ad apocalypse, so if you like what I do here and you want to support the channel and support making new videos, please do consider helping me on Patreon to get us to our next goal. You don't have to, it's completely free will. I'm not going to force you, you know, none of these videos are going to be locked behind paywalls. And until next time, I'll stay safe and I'll see you all very soon. Bye!